Good evening, everyone.
Good evening,
Good
madam.
evening.
Good evening. Good evening.
Okay, so
Good evening.
there is a saying by John Maxwell, known as America's expert on leadership. A leader is one who knows the way, goes the way, and shows the way. But I'm sure, accounting to the current time, many business leaders around the world would be wondering, how do we really move forward in such uncertain circumstances? Can we really see positive leadership in these challenging times? Indeed, the litmus test of a positive leader is esprit de corps, which they create with their troops, which is nothing but a quality to see leadership in action, which is mutually acceptable. On that note, once again, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and a warm welcome to all of you for today's international webinar on leadership, a paradigm shift. I am Janet Alexander, your facilitator for today's webinar. Along with me, we have Amit Rathod, co-facilitating this program with me. Hey Amit, if you can come and say hello.
Sure. A very good evening, everybody. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you for the second time after the first symposium that we had on digital sales and human touch. Now let's talk about another interesting topic. So welcome aboard.
Thank you, Amit. To say, this webinar is in collaboration with IRYS Group and the Indian Society for Training and Development, ISTD. And to translate today's webinar vision into reality, we have not one, but three stalwarts who are going to lead the way. Let's take this opportunity to welcome our first panelist, Mr. Shubho Roy from London, who's the head banking capital market solution emphasis. So if you can say hello.
Everyone. Hi, everyone. Hi.
Yeah.
Welcome, Mr. Roy.
Yeah, Mr. Roy, welcome.
We also have with us Mr. Udayan Ganchaudhary from Melbourne, Australia, who is the Senior Manager Technology Consulting from Accenture.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome,
Pleasure to
Udayan.
be here. Thank you very much.
We have with us Mr. L. Vishwanathan, who is the Group CFO and EVP Stock Holding Corporation, India.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome, Mr. Vishwanathan.
Hi. Okay.
We also have with us special guest, Mr. Pradeep V. Kamath. To introduce Mr. Kamath, he is the management educator, versatile trainer, and senior HR professional from Mumbai. And he has more than 25 years experience as visiting faculty in HRM in leading management institutes in Bombay. He was also conferred Best Member Award and Fellowship by ISTD for contribution in training and development and to and to human resource development. He is a frequent contributor and researcher in areas of strategic HRM, and he's also been awarded first prize for his research paper presentation. We are very happy to welcome you, Mr. Kamath. If you can come and say hello. So you're on mute. Can you just unmute yourself?
Hello.
Welcome, Mr. Kamath. Also, I would now like to take opportunity to invite Dr. Natraj Ray, who's the National President of ISTD and member of HR Subcommittee of CII, to speak a few words on this occasion and inaugurate the webinar for all of us.
Thank you, madam. Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and my dear past president, chairman, secretary, and chapter chairmen, and other ISTD friends. We have with us our RBP West, that is a Korean Daniel, our own Korean Daniel. He is always doing this webinar very efficiently organized the thing. We have also with us some of the senior members like Sholil Chatterjee from Bhopal, Mr. Kamath from Bombay, Mr. Chitlangia also from Bombay. Welcome all the National Council members in this webinar. Because they are our team, we are welcome all this. I am happy that ISTD Western region with the leadership Mr. Korean Daniel and Irish group as doing this program. And this is a very interesting program. But in this turbulent and uncertain time, we ISTD felt that we should do some knowledge sharing session for the members of the entire HR fraternity and management fraternity in the globe to share our views COVID-19. We therefore decided to provide a platform to the eminent leader, visionary leader, statutory leader to share their experience during this difficult time, very uncertain time. Madam told me this is a very uncertain time. So leadership, a paradigm shift, uncertain time. What is our motto to survive, and what is our motto to lead the organization? With this, we have earlier many distinguished speakers spoken in this webinar on behalf of ISTD. Today we have with us very eloquent three speakers. One is Shubha, Mr. Shubha, Mr. Udayan, and also Mr. L. Vishwanathan. Welcome all of them for ISTD in this today's evening webinar. We have also with us the entire things by Kurian Daniel for this arranging this program. Thank you, Kurianji, and the Western region on this occasion. Today's topic is the leadership paradigm shift. So we have learned a lot of how to make the leadership, how to lead the leader, but it is a very interesting subject, very interesting topic. So I am tempted to tell one or two words, madam, if you agree. Very small 2-3 lines. After that, formally, Kuri and Daniel will inaugurate the thing, is RBP West. So I know that what is the leader can do and what is the leader cannot do. So the leader, I can take the leader who delivers the growth of the organization is the leader. Innovation, the versatile of the organization, innovation for the organization. I make him, or I talk him is a leader. Organization agility, is an expert on cultural change. Any organization, leader has to change the cultural change. Nobody change. Leader make the organization in the right path and right direction. Leadership development, leader make the leadership to other his followers. So leader has make the organization leadership development so that in his absence, leader should take the lead the organization. Team effectiveness and also capability building, that is also required the leaders to make all these things. And finally, the transformation of his leadership to his followers. This is the leadership success. So with this, I can tell you one or two lines to conclude my session, that in this uncertain time, all organizations and others in a very tough situation. So leader can give the certain direction, and leader can give the bottom line up for the right path and right direction, right communication to every aspect, so that organization should go in the right way. The decision making happen. So decision has to give the leader to how to survive after this COVID-19. So today's scenario is a very good topic, the paradigm shift of the leader. Earlier leader is doing only certain way, but this crisis time, he has to enlighten the organization how to do it. The leaders has to be the good relation with the others. He is a coach. So leader has to do it. Authentic evaluation. Leader has to evaluate who is the next leader, successor. He has to make this. And finally, deliberate the delegation. This is the thing we have learned today from all the eloquent speaker Udayan, Shubha, and L. Vishwanath. I formally feel that this is a very enjoyable panel discussion. I once again thank all the participants. I once again thank all the speakers and also the host and anchor madam for this program. And now I would request the RBP West to the formal inauguration of this webinar session, international webinar session, as a part of ISTD, and as it will be a very enjoyable panel discussion for today's evening. Thank you, madam. Thank you. Over to madam.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ray, for highlighting the characteristics of a leader which will impact the organization in a positive way. Thank you for your kind words. I also invite Mr. Kurian Daniel, who is the Regional Vice President West and founder ISTD Navi Mumbai, to share his thoughts.
Thank you, Janet. Good evening to one and all. As Janet was mentioning, this is a critical situation for everybody. But of course, we are making all the challenges to opportunities. Earlier also, IRYS associated with us and done some programs. And for this particular thing also, I thank IRYS for partnering with us and making this program, and also making very eminent speakers for this particular webinar. Friends, with the permission of our National President and with all of you, I officially inaugurate this webinar. Over to Janet.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Daniel, for inaugurating this webinar for everyone. So, there's some powerful words which struck in my mind. How dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words. These were the words of a teenage girl, Greta Thunberg, who addressed all the world leaders at the United Nations General Assembly in the year 2019. She is just 17 years old, and now she is known as one of the greatest influencers for climate change issues. So I wonder if leadership really comes with age, gender, rank, or a position. I'm sure it's a decision and it's a choice. But if you see, the path to women leadership have not been easy though. We have been seeing many Indian and international women leaders who have made significant contribution in various fields. Be it Savitribai Phule, who was the first to start education amongst girls, or Kalpana Chawla, first woman of Indian origin to go to space. Or if we see Michelle Obama, an American lawyer and author, or Sheryl Sandberg, the current chief operating officer at Facebook. When Anand Mahindra, the chairman of Mahindra Group, last year tweeted a powerful Spanish illustration acknowledging how far behind our society is still in terms of gender equality, the tweet went viral. He mentioned, "I salute every working woman and acknowledge that their success have required a much greater amount of effort than their male counterparts coming from a man itself." And let's see what the tweet was. So if you all can see the image, which is shown on the screen, this was the tweet that went viral, and how Anand Mahindra basically saluted every working woman. It's a powerful statement coming from a man from that position. But when it comes to corporate world, the share of women in senior roles is increasing, but incrementally as per Catalyst research. In 2019, 29% of senior management roles were held by women, the highest number ever on record. 87% of global businesses have at least one woman in a senior management role. And the proportion of women in senior leadership differs by role. 43% of human resources directors are women compared to 17% of sales directors and 16% of chief information officers. A woman's perception of leadership begins not with academic success, her first break, or even when she is named to a position of power. The trajectory to women leadership starts much earlier and is defined by key influences throughout her life. Now, this is not a fight or a debate or me talking as a woman. Although we see a slight change in women leadership, when it comes to the corporate world, there is a long way to go. Hence, the real question is, can everyone be a leader, or are we just saying it's the survival of the fittest? For that, we really need to understand the science behind and the science in leadership. And I would really like to invite now Mr. Udayan Ganchadri to share his thoughts on how we all can progress on towards having the ability to adapt when it comes to leadership. Over to you, Udayan.
Hi, Janet, and thanks for that intro. Now, the ability to adapt, to talk about that, it's important to look at leadership as a science, okay? Now, I have some audio visuals because science cannot go without illustrations. So let's just throw them up a bit. And let's start with this guy. Many of you should know him, especially who have been through the B-School journey. He's the eminent management guru, Peter Drucker. Okay, and he once said, only three things happen naturally in organizations: friction, confusion, and underperformance. Everything else requires leadership. Now, if that's so important, then there must be a science to it. So on that note, let's talk about one of the most popular theory of recent times. We must have read about different types of leadership styles, situational leadership, what influences what, etc. But those are probably old school. Newer thoughts let's bring to this forum. One of it is called the Golden Circle. Golden Circle is by Simon Sinek. Simon Sinek is one of the eminent American author and motivation speakers. So what he says is the proposed theory of Golden Circle is something that he identified as an underlying commonality of successful and inspiring leaders and how they think and act. What he says is...
Then, sorry to interrupt you. Are you sharing the screen? Because we are unable to see it.
Yeah, I am sorry. I should have done the sharing first. I didn't. Only host, only panelist.
No, you can
share all panelists.
No, let me tell you, Uday, so when you click on share screen, is any option coming up?
It is coming up. It says who can share, only host, all panelists.
You can share your screen. You just have to select the window which is opened for the PPT and restart sharing.
Yeah, that's how you usually do. This time it's a bit different, it seems. It says advanced sharing. Okay, advanced sharing options. Hold on. I'll do it. Yeah, all good now. So I think I'm good now. So I hope you can see my screen.
Yes.
Can you see the Golden Circle, all of you? Okay. And I was talking about just this gentleman, just for a quick recap, that he said, and let me just minimize this thing. Yeah. 3 things that happen: friction, confusion, underperformance. Everything else requires leadership. That's the statement of this great thinker, Peter Drucker. Now, on that note, going to one of the latest philosophies around leadership by Simon Sinek, right? So what he says is there's a commonality that he has identified between the speakers or among the speakers and inspiring leaders of our times. And what he says is it can be summarized in the form of 3 circles. The outer one is called what, which means what the company does, okay? The next one is how, which is the process. And the inner one is why. Now, let's get some examples here, okay? So what do you do? For example, I build a software, or suppose I deliver a service like a banking service, okay? Then it comes to how are you successful about it? I am successful because of, say, a product differentiation, a price, a competitive advantage in terms of price, or maybe service excellence, okay? So that also a lot of people know among the employees. But the bigger thing is why. I'm so sorry, that's why, that's not what. Sorry, it's why the purpose. Now, what happens is any company, when it gets established, started up, there's something called a mission, vision, goal, objective. That's something that remains forever. Sometimes it changes a little, but that's the overall purpose of existence. And this is the why. The problem is that gets lost in translation somewhere, okay? Neither the customers come to know, nor the employees come to know. Let's give an example. Suppose there's an XYZ mobile company. So how would they position their product? What? They would just say, we make great mobiles with great designs, etc. Fine, very well. But what's my reaction as a customer? I would say, well, I'm indifferent. Now, who gives me a better price? I'm going to go there, right? Now, the same is about selling your idea to your employee, and that's how you get followers, right? So instead of doing that, just flip it over and consider a company like Google or Apple. How would they position? They may say that, look, we believe, let's say Google would probably say the why statement saying that, look, we believe that an immense amount of comfort can be brought into our daily lives by the application of technology. That's why, okay? And that's why we exist. How? It can be done using process automations, artificial intelligence, and using cutting edge technology, right? And what, by the way, we have mobile phone as one of our products in the product line. right? So just by flipping the thought from outside in to inside out, we have attached an emotion, a soul, a purpose to this very product, okay? And the narrative becomes completely different. Now think, if I am a customer, I'm thinking about it in that way. If I'm a person working in this XYZ mobile company versus Google company, what kind of value do I carry, right? And the purpose of leadership is actually to instill this value, to take this value from the very core or leadership level and percolate it all the way to every member at the grassroots level. That is when you have the same amount of value, the passion and everything across the organization, right? So that is what it is. Now let's understand a bit of theory behind it, okay? And what he says, and this also comes from Simon Sinek, he says that, look, this is not psychology, this is biology, okay? Just imagine if you cut my brain, okay, transversely, and what you see is the inner portion of the brain is called the reptilian brain, okay? And the reptilian, it's not Brian, it's brain, I'm sorry about that. So reptilian brain, and what does that do? This is one of the most primitive parts of the brain which dictates our instincts. If I'm hungry, I will have food. If I'm angry, I may try, I may turn violent, okay? But the upper portions are newer portions. For example, the limbic brain. The limbic brain talks about emotions and feelings. Now that's common throughout animals, right? And that's why you see with a dog, with a pup, with any other kind of animal, though there is no language connection, we still connect, okay? Let's say music, a sense like that resides or appeals to this aspect of the brain. Now let's look at the final aspect, which is more modern brain, which is a neocortex. It is about rational thinking, your calculations, rational decisions, language reside here. Now, when you're talking with the why, the purpose, you are actually appealing to the limbic brain, okay? Which means you are surpassing all barriers of language, nationality, race, creed, kind, everything, and directly talking soul to soul and instilling that purpose in there, right? And that's the biology behind it. Now let's talk about a couple of examples here, okay? How would perhaps Tesla talk about its purpose? It would perhaps say that, look, we believe that we can challenge the status quo of everything. That's what we believe in. And we believe that things can be improved and we can answer bigger questions in terms of, suppose, what do you call that, reusable energy, etc. Okay, think about how Facebook would have their why purpose. They would say that, look, we believe there's a lot of power in sharing of knowledge and information. By the way, Facebook is just an outcome, right? So that's how you need to change the thinking to be able to translate your purpose to your team. Now, let's go to a funny example, okay? Not really funny, but I would say more inspiring, okay? This gentleman, his name was Christopher Wren, okay? He's a 17th century English architect. Now, he was responsible for building the St. Paul's Cathedral in London. Shubho can do a history check sometime locally, probably. So what he did is he once anonymously, or rather, in disguise, he walked across his workplace where people were actually breaking the stones and creating statues, etc. And he started asking people, what are you doing here? So one of them said, I am breaking the stone. The other worker said, I'm earning 16 pence a day. Okay. And when he went to the third one, he said, I am building a cathedral for Christopher Wren. That means 1 out of 3, and probably it is 1% of the employees actually understand the true purpose. These are the employees who are outcome oriented. These are the employees who don't work 9 to 5 and take a paycheck and go home, but take the entire outcome to its final conclusion, right? Finally, before I conclude, I'll leave you with a very inspiring story from NASA. Okay, it's called the NASA janitor. July 1969, very eventful month and year, right? The first man went to moon. Now, during the launch times, obviously, just like here in India, Modi went to ISRO, then John F. Kennedy went to NASA to meet the crew, to give them all the thumbs up and etc. So obviously there was a big press that followed. Now, they went to each and every crew member, as in people who are on board, people who are at the control center, and you have seen the NASA control center, huge mammoth. So they kept interviewing everyone. What are you doing? What are you doing? What's your name? What are you doing? And people had different answers. One said, look, I'm looking at all the controls should be absolutely fine before we take off. The other one said, I'm responsible to ensure that this, the communication does not snap when the rocket is in space, etc., different things. And in that frenzy, they could not help but went to even the janitor who was cleaning the floor, and they asked, hi, what do you do? And in fact, John F. Kennedy said, hi, I am JF Kennedy. What do you do here? And then comes the most historic response of all. The janitor turns around and says, Mr. President, I am helping to put a man on the moon. Therefore, out of the entire hundreds of crews, there was one person who was comparatively doing a less critical and humble job, who knew the purpose and the mission and was working for the ultimate goal and not for his actual day job. That's a thought I would leave you with, considering the science of leadership and how purpose is important. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Udayan, for sharing with us the scientific importance of leadership through the golden circle, as you mentioned, what, how, and why. It's very important to realize that what exactly is the purpose as leader and how do we do it? What is the process we should follow? And the impact that's going to get created amongst our stakeholders. I'm sure that the emerging neuroscience, as you mentioned, even a janitor is being able to impact the mission that was, the first person landing on moon. So I hope that the leaders will surely use these sciences to kind of lead the organization through a success. Over to you, Amit.
So leading edge organizations, you see, as of today, recognize that their people resource is the single most significant factor that will enable them to differentiate themselves in the future. And that is what they want to invest in. It is the head count, the human head count is where they want to invest all their time, money, and energy. And successful leadership requires a very strong amalgamation or a balance of emotional intelligence. But how should we measure this up with IQ, which is intelligent quotient? Let's hear more about the balance between EQ, IQ, and having a spiritual inclination towards leadership from our next panelist, Mr. Vishwanathan.
Thank you, Amit, for the nice introduction. See, there's been a shift in the leadership power from a power base to a non-power base. That is from a power base to empowerment base. The empowerment in the second case comes from the followers and not from the delegated power. The empowerment itself comes from the follower to the leader. The organization is, in such a case, is a network of collaboration with leadership across the network of the organization spread. So the question is, how do you spot those leadership, those leaders from within the organization? So it's not difficult, but it comes like, see, a leader is someone who's like a light piercing out of a hole in the covered shade. See, if you have a covered shade and if there is a small hole, the light comes out of it. It's like that. You can always spot a leader. No, what is that you see in a leader? Okay, what is that? How does a leader behave? So that comes, and then I'll answer your question about the intelligent quotient, emotional quotient. How does it work in that? See, generally, if you say there are traits, common traits which a leader demonstrates himself. One is he's more of a strategic perspective rather than being tactical in nature. That means he has a more broader idea, a more broader vision, and business. Say in the case of business, has a better business acumen. In the case of a political leader, have a better political acumen. Those kind of a thing. His decision-making process is more of, sometimes it could be in the current day scenario, it could be a data-driven decision, or it could be intuitive basis also. So many a times, in fact, a true leader goes with the intuitive decision rather than sequential decision based on the data. They always drive for results. These are some of the basic qualities. Then another major thing is valuing people and relationship. Relationship that is looking at others' point of view and what does other require. This brings them to the larger purpose, like why, what Udayan has mentioned, the question of why will be answered in this. Once if you go into the introspection of it, what is the purpose for which I am leading? So then comes the mission, then the vision, and all this, which so the why is very, very important. That comes and from there derives the purpose. So a leader transforms himself from mere business acumen and everything to a larger area of a purpose. Now when it comes to purpose, then when the purpose is known, for what purpose he is, then automatically the passion comes in the person. The passion sets the drive for him to have this result achieved towards it. And then for doing all this, he requires what is called as intelligent quotient. See, intelligent quotient is nothing but it's a cognitive thinking. Say primarily it's a logical thinking of one after another, but it has been absorbed. See, earlier days, the behavioral scientists have they thought that a leader should have one of the must quality is to have intelligent quotient. But today it is not. There are several other scientists, especially Daniel Goleman. He has observed that in fact, what Daniel did is about 40 years of data he has collected from the top MBA graduates from the United States and has seen their lifestyle after 40 years. What is that in terms of purpose they have achieved? And what is that one thing which is a commonality in the persons who have actually achieved this? And then he has come out with what is called as emotional quotient, a term called emotional quotient, which has been there for now almost 1.5 decade now. To explain what the emotional quotient is, basically, first of all, it consists of self-awareness. That is to go oneself deep within inside and see what oneself is. What is my, suppose if I have to see myself, what are my strength, weakness, my own SWOT analysis, and how do I use this to achieve my goal? What are my strengths? How do I work on my deficiency and go into achieving the goal? Then the self-regulation. Then the next thing comes the self-regulation. How do I control myself, redirecting emotions into actions, my own emotions into actions? The third one is the motivation. See, this is a very, very difficult thing to do. Motivation is a self-motivation. See, invariably what happens is adversity comes, people find they give up. They give up. That is where it is found that the people who has a high emotional quotient, they have been able to perceive and pursue their mission without giving up. See, the give up is not done there. See, I'll just give you an example here of one example of perseverance really comes to my mind is former US President Abraham Lincoln. Everybody knows that one of the greatest leader world has ever produced. If you look at it, at the age of 9, his mother died. At the age of 22, he lost his job as a clerk. At the age of 25, he lost the legislative election. At the age of 28, his beloved died. Okay, at the age of 30, his election to the post of a speaker, he lost. At the age of 35, he lost Congress election. At the age of 46, he lost senatorial election. At the age of 47, he lost vice presidential election. With all this loss, at the age of 52, he became the president of the United States of America. See, anybody in his position would have actually given up. With so many failures, they would have actually given up for aspiring to become president. What was his mission? His mission was not to acquire a position. His mission was to remove the disparity which was existing in the human race at that time, which he brought during his time. And that was the only motive for which he became the president of the United States of America. And today he is one of the, see, there are so many presidents of the United States who have come and gone, but everyone who talks about leadership, they talk about him only because he is one of the ones who actually had pursued his missions very, very with all adversaries and difficulties. Another part about the emotional quotient is the empathy towards others. There, see, you have to look at others' point of view and what does the people at large, okay, would like to, how is it going to serve people at large? This is one of the points which normally when it comes to emotional quotient which comes. The other point which you mentioned is about the spiritual quotient. This, see, these are all terms which is being there right now. That does not mean that the earlier leaders did not possess it. It is basically the behavioral scientists have actually come to understand the leaders' trait, and then they have labeled certain labeling like spiritual quotient and emotional quotient. This spiritual quotient was done by two researchers, namely Dana Johar and Ian Marshall. So what they say is this basically a good leader, he has a spiritual quotient in addition to intelligent quotient and emotional quotient. The spiritual quotient consists of how it asks the leader to ask a question whether he has to be, why he has to be in that situation, and he has to identify that particular spot in the human brain which is called as the God spot. Okay, it's called as God spot, which gives him how to deal with the disappointment. How to deal with disappointment. Take the case of even what I mentioned before about Abraham Lincoln. All disappointments, but he could actually face all this, face this disappointment. So this is about the spiritual quotient. So it is a combination of all these traits makes a person leader. So in an organization, actually in today's context, the leaders actually assume a responsibility for themselves and they show this. They don't need to be given this. Let us take again example of this thing, political leader, say in our own country, Mahatma Gandhi. From nowhere, he came from somewhere in Africa and he came to India. He assumed the responsibility to lead the Congress to fight against fight for the India's freedom. He never aspired actually for a designation. So what I'm trying to say is the leader need not be hierarchical. Like it need not be that the CEO of the company is a leader. The leaders are there across the, if you look at it, Mahatma Gandhi never became the Prime Minister of India. Okay, but he still led the country to freedom. And everybody who even became Prime Minister of India or Pakistan, they were all at one point in time listening to Mahatma Gandhi. Okay, so that is what the trait leadership brings in. And the leader always finds his followers, and a leader is always also himself a follower. These are some of the things which I thought that I will share with you on this.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vishwanathan. So, Mr. Vishwanathan, to paraphrase, what you just said, something that comes to my mind is during my initial days of training, when I started training, there was one question that a participant posed, and he asked me, Amit, what is the difference between a coach and a mentor? And I was tongue-tied because I really didn't have an answer then. I mean, after listening to what you said, now I realize the difference between the two, right? A coach is somebody who is assigned to me, but a mentor is a leader who I choose to make my mentor. Like the example you talked about, Abraham Lincoln. You've chosen him to be your mentor and learn from his ups and downs. Personally, for me, Elon Musk is one of my favorite mentors through his entire hardships of ups and downs. And I am rejoicing the moment that his SpaceX program has been successful recently. And also a brilliant point that you talked about spiritual leadership. right? I understand where our mythology is concerned. We talk about Dronacharya and Eklavya, right? A very popular concept. Now, obviously, what happened then was absolutely right. But when we are looking at Dronacharya in today's COVID era, the whole idea about that is, it is not about taking a thumb away from your pupil. But if a pupil has only 4 fingers, how is it that you be a mentor and bring the best out of him? Thank you so much for highlighting that, Mr. Vishwanathan. Now, while we move to the next topic, I'll just share an example, a personal example that I experienced. This was way back in the year 1999, where I had my first formal job interview at the Taj. After various rounds of interviews, my final interview was with the general manager, Bernard Berche. And during the interview, I just saw a mug on his table, which read, "I cannot spell success without you." Now, to be honest, when I read that mug, I found it very silly, saying that, how can that be possible? I am just a college graduate. I am just joining as a fresher, as an executive, and I have the general manager of the Taj sitting right across, who is the next best thing to God. And why or how is it that he can relate or he can stand by the wordings of saying, we cannot spell, or I cannot spell success without you? I realized the true meaning of that when I moved into a leadership role myself, realizing that a new organizational model features an inverted pyramid, where the worker or the team member is ideally on the top of the pyramid, and the leader or the CEO is at the tapering end of the pyramid. And the purpose of this inverted leadership pyramid is to maximize communication between the members of an organization, and also to create flexibility and more openness in the dialogue between the two ends of the spectrum. So to understand crisis and inverted pyramid of authentic leadership, I welcome Mr. Shovoro. Over to you, Mr. Roy.
Hey, thank you, Amit. I hope you can hear me and see me.
Yes,
well, right?
Crystal clear.
Perfect. So let me share my screen, right? And I'll take you through this journey through a couple of points that I have. And I believe you guys can see my screen as well, right?
Yes.
Perfect. Brilliant. So let's move on from here. So I'll start with some images. Now, I believe most of you will remember these brands. And I have to use the past tense for these because these brands do not exist anymore. What is common here amongst all these brands? These brands were Fortune 100 companies in the year 2000, some of the biggest companies in the world. And by 2020, today, they don't exist anymore. Okay, that's been the rapid scale of degeneration in these companies and caused by crisis. Different crisis for different people. We'll come to that, but that's what crisis has done to some of the biggest brands in the world. Now, if you're thinking these kind of anecdotal sort of crises do not happen to every company, it will not happen to mine, you're wrong. I have some data points here, right? Look at this. 52% of the Fortune 500 companies in the year 2000 do not exist anymore. They don't exist. They have changed. They have liquidated. They have been administered. They have merged with somebody else. Further, half of the FTSE 100 companies, which is the London Stock Exchange top 100 companies, which is equivalent to what you have in Sensex or Nifty in India, will churn in the next 10 years. Basically, they won't be in the index anymore. They won't be half as important. And that's 50%. Look at the rapid rate of descent we're going through in the entire industry. When you look at the logos, you have a variety there. You have a bank, you have a telecom company, you have a leisure, hospitality, energy, car manufacturers, the entire lot, right? So there is only one thing true here. Performance is not guaranteed as a business outcome. It is not going to happen unless you as a leader make it happen, right? With that, let's move on. What leads to these kind of crises, right? Now, the first thing that you hear a lot of these is this disruption. People talk about digital disruption a lot these days. But disruption is not only digital, it's not started happening since 2019 or 2018. I'll give you an example once again. The first disruption that comes is from customer behavior and demand pattern changes, right? Example there. When I used to go to college, and I used to go to college in Kolkata in India, I used to carry a small Walkman, a cassette tape player in my pocket. I had media, that was listening to music, and I was using that as my only method of listening to music. When I started my first job towards late 90s in Kolkata, it was a CD player. Those were digital media as well, but they were tied to a physical form. Now that industry of manufacturing physical form to carry digital media doesn't exist anymore. It's dead, it's gone, right? And it's gone for good because it was significantly environmentally unfriendly. That's the way customer behavior of consumption something changes. Second, let's look at how competition can bring in disruption. Pricing can bring in disruption. Airlines, commercial aviation is a great example. If you look at the commercial aviation model, the low-cost carriers have come in and they've completely disrupted the high-cost full-service players. Aviation companies are shutting down left, right, and center. It's happened in India as well. It's happening globally. Why is it so? Aviation as a model, the leadership of aviation, commercial aviation, had built the product around some very hollow, vanity-based principles. They had attached and wrapped the product with a layer of vanity. It was as if flying on an aeroplane was a big thing. So you served wine and you're given white glove services. All of those things were actually not needed. If you travel for example, if you travel from let's say in the Surabaya city in Indonesia into Lombok, which is a small island town. If you go from Melbourne to let's say one of those smaller outback towns, if you go from to Ballarat, for example, you'll realize that, or if you go from Malta to Naples, you'll realize that an aeroplane is just a bus that flies. There is nothing special about it. Now, the whole industry had designed products and priced it in a certain way that actually did not factor that simple precept that it was just a method of travel. And when the low-cost carriers came in and said, no, we don't want to do it, we'll just use it as a bus, boom, everybody was out of business. And I'm talking specifically of things like Kingfisher, for example, Kingfisher Airlines, in the red right from day one because of that white glove service mentality. You did not need it. You had structured yourself in a different way. So that's how market disruption happens, customer behavior, your own fault in terms of pricing product and creation of product. Second point, regulatory mandates. Regulations can significantly change the way you behave and the way you run your businesses. A great example is since 2008, if you look at what has happened, right? So ban on proprietary trading and ban on naked short sales, the fundamental basis of stock borrow loans, has actually thrown a lot of investment banks out of business. This was done out of the back of the Volcker rule in the US. They have thrown investment banks left, right, and center out of business. The biggest casualty, Deutsche Bank, one of the biggest banks in the world, the largest investment bank in Europe, has been forced to shut down their business unit, primarily because they couldn't cope up with the regulatory speed. And they couldn't cope up with the way, regulations change the way you do your business. Indian example, the deferred tax demand on telecom companies that happened recently has thrown out established players like Idea or whatever out of business. And you only have 2 or 3 players remaining anymore, Jio being one of the benefactors of that policy, right? So regulations can deeply change the way you do your business. Number 3, event risk, large event, the one like we're going through right now, COVID-19 situation. And every time you think of event risk, the first event that comes to your mind is 9/11. 9/11 caused a significant fall in revenues for airline companies. A lot of them went bust, right? But there's one small story there. Cantor Fitzgerald, the investment bank in New York, at that point in time used to clear and trade almost a third, at least 30% of the US Treasury business, which amounted to $3 trillion. That firm was hit. The floor of the WTC that was hit was the Cantor Fitzgerald floors. And that firm went out of business. Ever since, they have not been able to revive. They're doing small things here and there, trying to revive from London, etc. But they are out. They are not one of the biggest players anymore. That's what an event can do to you. Change the way you do your business. Having said that, all these changes are navigable, as I say. But when challenges are navigable, resistance to change is not. In the same environment as we are talking of right now, I can give you 100 examples of companies that have survived. 2 floors below Cantor and Fitzgerald was Goldman Sachs. In fact, theirs were the first machines that were shut off when the plane came and hit into the Tower 1. But they have gone on to become one of the largest investment banks in the world in the same environment. While Enron shut down, BP and Shell have gone roaring business. Saudi Aramco even had an IPO a couple of months back successfully. So you cannot say energy has gone down. It's a specific company that has gone down. And the best way to talk about it is Kodak, the example I have there. What resistance can do. Now, Kodak was one of the biggest photographic companies in the world. And it is said that in 1980s, at least 1 in 3 cameras in the world had a Kodak film roll in it. It was that popular. But they went out of business in 2012. They filed Chapter 11. They are bankrupt. They're gone now. And the main reason that is cited is digital disruption. People say, oh, Kodak was taken off because digital cameras came into play. Now, if you turn around and if I ask you, who invented the digital camera? It was a Kodak engineer back in 1975, Steven Sasson, who invented the digital camera. And he went on continuously to the board saying, look, this is the way photography is going to happen in the future. But the board sat on it for 2 decades. For 2 decades, Kodak did not move on the prime mover advantage they had, and they lost it out. When they finally decided in 1998 that they will start manufacturing digital cameras, it was too late. Sony had already taken the position out, and they could never come back from that situation. So if you resist change, the only reason Kodak did that was because they did not want to cannibalize the revenues they have from their film roll division. If you resist change, the market will force you out of business. That's the learning we have here, right? Moving on. What can leaders then do to catalyze change during crisis? Because every crisis will force you to make a change, right? What can leaders do? Now, if you think of it, exploration and exploitation are 2 of my favorite words. What is exploration? Exploration is learning something new, innovating. Exploitation is doing what you do much better and much more efficiently. Exploitation is using your own knowledge that you've already acquired. Exploration is learning something new. If you look at children, they are in an exploration phase. They explore every moment. They're learning something new. They have little to exploit because their knowledge base is being built. Whereas when you look at us, adults, grown-ups, we exploit. We already know. We go about our day using the knowledge that we have already had, our daily use of our knowledge that we already built over years into college, into university, into our jobs. That's what we plow back every day in our jobs, in our households, doing things that we go about doing, right? Corporates are exactly like that. Leaders need to find the balance between exploration and exploitation. At far end of the exploitation cycle is the Kodak example, where you had an ability to explore, but you did not. You had innovation in your own hands, but you did not innovate. You sat on it. That's too much exploitation. And on the other end, too much exploration is done in Silicon Valley. Every 100th firm in Silicon Valley goes down because they do not ever get to scale. They do not ever get to a position where they are utilizing their own knowledge and doing something bigger and better. They are just bothered about the next innovation. And that doesn't work either. A great leader, Elon Musk, somebody talked about it, I believe, Amit talked about it. Elon is a great example. He's balancing his exploration ability and his exploitation ability. So while Tesla does better and better every day, he's continuously pumping money into SpaceX to do the next thing. He did the same when he moved out of PayPal and started Tesla. The difference in his environments are huge. You first start a payments company, digital payments company. From there, you move on to manufacturing cars. And now you are sending astronauts to space. There is no relation between the 3 things you do, but he does it so well. That's number 1. Number 2, authority-based leadership always breeds contempt. And I believe we talked about empathy. Mr. Vishwanathan spoke so well about empathy in leadership, right? Every authority flows down from your chair. Authority does not give you trust. It only forces people to do a few things that you ask them to do. And it breeds contempt for the work you do, right? And if you look at it, the delegation of power and power equations create a big problem in the business model. We always get defensive when we are criticized by somebody from a place of authority. So we do not perform well. And it ends up in creating a cult-like hero worshipping model of leadership, which makes the leader, who is also a human being, very fallible. And the entire organization then becomes fallible because of the leader, because there's no one questioning the authority of the leader. A great example of that is the G model of the Lee Iacocca model of leadership, which is now taken on to Boeing. And if you look at Boeing, how could you, for all practical purposes, let an aircraft take into air and certify the airworthiness of that aircraft when test pilots have said things like these airplanes look like they have been designed by clowns and they were supervised by monkeys? This is a test pilot writing a report on the 737 MAX. And yet that got certification, yet it went into aviation, crashed twice, and killed 700 people. That's the problem with authority-based leadership, because people don't question you. Final one, trust. And Udayan talked about the need for safety in relationships. Leadership is also about safety. You need to create a safe environment for everybody to operate. So leaders, the first job is to build trust. And trust does not happen automatically. If you think of it, we do not operate in an environment where we are challenged. Our basic role, our basic job, our basic instinct is to get to the reptilian instinct, as Udayan mentioned, and Simon keeps talking about it so much. We try to protect, we get protective, we get defensive, we ring fence our own area, we get territorial, trying to protect our own selves, right? Safety cannot be delivered. That is what the leader needs to do. You need to create a circle of safety around your employees, around the mission that you are executing. And that's the role of the leader. Safety does not come in from an HR circular. It does not come in from an inter-office memorandum. It has to be created. And a great example of creating that trust-based leadership and safety are the armed forces. The US Marines, for example, the first principle that a Marine officer gets is the officer eats last. It is for everybody to eat. Every single member of the troops will eat first, and only when there's some food left will the officer get it. Now, these are the guys who are actually putting their lives in their lines of duty. So think of it this way. When I see every day that my leader is surviving on some dry fruits and nuts in a harsh environment while I have had my full meal, I will be ready to take his orders. I'll be ready to lay my life down for. And there are plenty of examples of how that thing happens. Leadership is about the trust that you build in. And that's exactly what leaders need to do. There's the fantastic thing that Simon Sinek talks about, and I will quote him. He says, there's a problem, there's a disbalance between the way society views leadership and the military views leadership. And it's a very important comment. I'll quote him. He says, in the military, they give medals to people who are willing to sacrifice their lives so that others may gain. In business, we give bonuses to people who are willing to sacrifice others so we may gain. There is a structural difference between the way we view leadership and the way the army views leadership. And that's where everybody in a crisis would go, right? I'll wrap up very quickly. Dr. Greg Ciotone was the commander of the National Disaster Medical Services, Massachusetts 2, when 9/11 happened, one of the biggest crisis situations in the world. He had three things in mind. He said, first, compartmentalize. Put your thoughts in a package. Thoughts that are not relevant, package them and put them away. So if you're thinking about how will my son reach school or how will my brother's wedding happen, put them away for the moment. Number two, build a mission. Go on a mission. Enable the team. Let them decide for themselves. Fight for themselves. Wolves, they always hunt in packs. And the leader doesn't tell how to herd the prey. They decide for themselves. That pack hunting is a mission. They have to kill because they have to eat. And that's how you lead during crisis times. Final one, as I said, build trust. Serve the mission and the team. As a leader, that's what you do. You serve the mission. You don't serve yourself. When you do that, this is what you would typically see in your management books. This is how an organization is structured, right? There's a team, the bottom of the pyramid, the middle of the pyramid, and the leader at the top. When you do all of this that you have done on the top, it changes this way. The mission comes at the top, the team at the bottom, and somebody rightly said, the leader sits at the bottom, just supporting the entire structure. That's when you can face crisis properly. Thank you. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shubha Roy. And if I have to paraphrase the entire insights you shared, a book written by Marshall Goldsmith, what got you here won't get you there, is something that comes to my mind, especially where it comes to managing crisis in terms of customer behaviors, or be it regulations, events, and change to resistance. Now, all these aspects, something that worked yesterday before COVID-19, the same formula or the same SOP will not work post-COVID-19. And a brilliant point that you mentioned, which said that the officer always eats last. Now, a very profound statement that you made. Now, to add to what you just said, let's move into a poll right now, right? Because we've had 3 speakers who've shared their insights with us. And on the note where we've talked about the leader usually eats last. But while we are with that thought, let's also see what are the different leadership styles that we can resonate to or we can relate to, right, with a poll. So Janet, over to you.
Thank you, Amit. So for all the participants who are part of this webinar, before we take the poll, I just wanted to inform you that I'm sure that you all in the round 1, we heard and gained a lot of knowledge about science and leadership, personal leadership, and inverted pyramid of authentic leadership from our eminent panelists. But it doesn't stop there. We also bring you various leadership sessions through IRYS Group in collaboration with ISTD, which will enable you to get the required skills, which will add value to your career growth through these training programs. So I'm just going to highlight these training programs, which you can quickly take a picture of, and later on contact IRYS Group for any clarifications or doubt, or if you want to enroll in these sessions. So these training sessions are for corporate individuals, as well as for people who are coming from the education sector. I would request everybody to just quickly take a picture of it. So this is done in collaboration with IRYS Group and ISTD. Okay, so I'm hoping everybody has taken a picture of it. So as Amit mentioned, whether we are managing a team at work or we are captaining a sports team or leading a major corporation, leadership style is crucial to our success. So let's look at some of the key leadership style, and let's select one of them which we relate with or resonate with better. So I'm just going to launch a poll now, and I would request everybody to just take 30 seconds to go through the 5 leadership styles and select one which you relate better with. Hope all the participants can see it. I would request everybody to quickly go through it. We have transactional leadership, bureaucrat leadership, laissez-faire, servant leadership, and transformation leadership. Just take another 1 minute. Let's take last 30 seconds. Quickly, who have not put the poll, you can just have a quick look. Okay, so here I'm ending the poll. And as you all can see, the top two leadership styles, if we see, has come in through transformational leadership and servant leadership. Thank you everyone for putting your poll. So if you actually see, while the transformation leadership approach is often a highly effective style to use in business, there is always not one right way to lead or manage that. In terms of a good leader, will always find him or herself switching instinctively between different styles according to the people and they will what they are dealing with. And this is often referred to as situational leadership. Now, defining a leader and the qualities that demonstrate situation leadership have evolved over a past decade. However, a consistent methodology for effective leadership has been the subject of great debate always. Now, let's understand what are some of the key developments and changes that have taken place in leadership from traditional times to now in terms of business. I once again invite Mr. L. Vishwanathan to share his thoughts on the same. Mr. Vishwanathan, you'll have to unmute yourself. Yes.
Hello, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
See, may I request Janet to put on a slide how leadership is evolving?
Yes, I have just showed it on screen.
Yeah. Yeah, as you can see from the, see how I've just taken out how the leadership was in different era. See, in the 19th century, how it was and how it was in 20th century and how it was in 21st century. If you take the case of 19th century, it was the government who were the leaders. Okay, they were calling the shot, and their main objectives used to be land acquisition or building colonies, like say British colonies were built, and these were the main objectives. And they used to depose a lot of power for this, and power used to be the main thing, and the result was the strength. Whoever has the highest strength always moved with it. Now the second, that is in the 20th century, what happened was it is the corporations who became the leaders. So in the 20th century, it is a free market. Instead of the government, it was the corporations who have started calling the shot. With a free market, the objective was moving from land acquisition to free market, then building colonies, etc., to actually capitalism. So individual corporations were building capital formation was taking place and all this. But the underlying leadership was that it has to be profit. The profit was the main underlying reason. Then the impact of this on the society was the success. Success was the main impact. The final thing is the citizens. Like in the 21st century, it became the citizens who calls the shot. In today's world, if you look at it, it's the citizen. Anything you do, the citizen who's the leader right now. And human capital development became the basic objective, and purpose drives the mission. So it is a purpose which drives the mission, and whatever you do, it has to have the impact on the society. So that is what the leadership is evolving. So it is basically the leadership is evolving from power to purpose, and your impact has to be from strength to significance to the society. See, I'll give you an example. See, way back in 90s, say when I am coming from the capital market, we were grappling with two major problems in the Indian capital market. One of them is the frontline trading part of it, where the trading was done through open outcry system. In the open outcry system, there was no transparencies, and people were not knowing about what is happening to the other side. So we thought that we will introduce the this thing stream-based trading system. So anonymous screen-based trading system, whereby a transparent price mechanism is known to people. We also thought that we will bring in for the settlement process. There used to be a lot of bad deliveries, etc., which used to take place when the shares are given. People were not knowing whether it's a good shares or bad shares, etc. So these were actually being the biggest problem which the citizens, the investors were facing it. So when we actually introduced the depository, in fact, the concept of depository be introduced in the country, and then it won't be, you'll be surprised that India is the first country to adopt depository in the dematerialized form in such a rapid pace. See, it was introduced in the year 1996. Within 2 years, almost you had 20 million investors who have actually gone into the depository mode. Whereas even a country like United States of America, where they had a depository which was way back in 1950, it was done. They were into physical mode of depository, which is called as immobilization. So the thing is, as long and the success comes as long as you feel that the instead of success, see, in this case, it's a significant. What has happened is this became very significant for people. So the significance, if you to the society, if it gets success automatically. The second example I can give you is, say, similar thing which we are in the industry of servicing citizen for e-stamping. The case of e-stamping, see how it evolved was the country was grappling with a lot of fake stamps. So at that time, the country did not know how to arrest this. So we came out with a transparent mechanism by which we can reach every citizen to their doorstep. They can download the stamp, and then even they can do the. So this is currently being used in 22 states in the country, and you will be surprised to know that about 40 million people are using e-stamping in the country. So whenever your purpose is to serve the citizen, then your magnitude it becomes higher, and the leadership automatically will be appreciated well by the citizen. So that's what I find is the change in the leadership means is from the there's no power required for this. Your purpose and mission has to be clear, that you need to serve to the society. And this follows what the earlier speakers talked about, servant leadership. So as long as you feel you're serving to the society, your success portion will come on its own. Hello?
Thank you, Mr. Vishwanathan. Thank you for saying it so well in terms of how the right purpose will only create an impact in terms of even the current situation that is going on, and how we are evolving also as leaders can help us adopt the right strategy and make that impact. So thank you so much for sharing that insightful thoughts. Over to Amit.
So, Janet, I was reading the chats column, while Mr. Vishwanathan was talking, and one of our attendees, Mr. Radha Ramanan Panikar, has a very insightful thought that he shared over there, where he talks about the COVID-19 era. Has it really brought to surface the hollowness of many leadership claims that we've otherwise been making, right? For example, rather than standing up and admitting that, okay, we went wrong in our leadership styles, or we went wrong in our planning or our forecasting, rather than standing up for their faults, they are using COVID-19 as an excuse to fire, right, a lot of their staff. Now, an interesting point out over here that our attendee has highlighted, that's Mr. Panikar, who states that is this leadership style, or the concept of this leadership, is it a West thing or is it an Indian thing? To which I really want to say that, Bernard Bass very clearly said that nearly every aspect of leadership is affected by the culture that the leader comes from. The values, the beliefs, the norms, the ideals embedded in a culture affects the leadership's behavior, the goal and the strategies of the organization that the leader belongs to. So to understand best practices of leadership, be it West or be it India, let's invite Mr. Shubho Roy.
Thank you, Amit. First of all, thank you, Mr. Vishwanathan. You reminded me of my very first job starting with National Stock Exchange of India. We had just started dematerializing. I was in the first sort of few months physically handling deliveries. And I know what you mean when you, when you say bad deliveries was rampant, right? It was a problem. I moved through a bunch of departments in NSE and then ended up in clearing as well. So thank you for reminding. It was nostalgic, the least I can say. And Amit, to your point, it's a very valuable point to whoever has mentioned it. I think it is very well brought out. I don't know whether it's Indian or it's certainly not Indian, and that's what I want to visit later in my thing. I think it has to do a bit with the cult leadership that I was talking about. When you build a cult around your image and whatever the purpose might be, you are becoming too big to fail. And that's happened with the banking sector as well. Some of the banks have become too big to fail. And when you fail, there is a reluctance to admit failure. And that sort of compounds the entire process. It just goes round and round in circles and becomes a vicious circle and a bottomless pit, basically. So that's what happens. But on that point of leadership, let me approach it a little differently. And I'm going to do it with a purpose, right? And the reason is, if I approach it from the point of view of, for example, executive pay, what we call a leader is tied very closely to what we are happy to compensate them from. So if I say, oh, you're my leader, I'm very happy to give a little bit of money to you from my own pocket to be my leader, right? So executive pay is a way we can judge how much an individual or the society values leadership, right? Now, the world over, people regularly get outraged by executive pay. In banking, retail, airlines, almost in every single industry, we object to the remuneration that we provide to our leaders, right? That's a very standard case. For example, I'll come back to Elon again. Just the other day, when Bob and Doug were docking into the ISS with their Crew Dragon, Elon was also cashing in on about $770 million of pay, basically stock options that vested on him that day because of Tesla prices. And the Tesla price was about $800 that day. Elon got it for $350. So the difference was about $770 million. Now that's a lot of money, and people were outraged. People were talking about why should somebody make so much money? Now, if I were to split that around and say, now how many of us, the same people, will object if I say I'll give that $770 million to Gandhi, for example, or to Dr. Martin Luther King, or to Nelson Mandela, to Mother Teresa? None of us will object, right? Leadership, and all of these guys are leaders, great leaders. Leadership does not flow in from a certain point. Leadership is not about what the corporate wants to tell us. It's about how we structure ourselves and how we get accepted through that circle of trust and safety that we create around ourselves, right? Now coming back to my last presentation, right? The perception of leadership in business is not aligned to the perception of leadership in society as such, right? And many such points will come up here. Here, on this point, I believe India is done a little better than the West, and I'll tell you why. Western leadership is resource orientated. It talks about how can I get resources, variety of it, human being one of those, but how can I use resources, manipulate different kinds of resources, and maximize shareholder value. That's the precept of Western leadership. If you talk to a Western CEO, for example, they're going to talk about financials, they're going to talk about market mechanics, they're going to talk about inorganic growth, they're going to talk about talent, technology, and all of those things, how they come together to make him and his company big. The leader sees themselves as someone who is harnessing all these factors and bringing the necessary growth for which the shareholders have poured their money into the company. That's the Western view of a leader. Interestingly, it's very different in India. And I keep hearing all my sort of co-speakers here coming back to empathy so many times here. That's a bit Indian. There was a Harvard Business Review some time back talking to some 68 or 70 Indian business leaders. All of these large conglomerates in India that we know of, they were interviewed, all the CEOs, including Vineet Nair and Ratan Tata and all of them, right? And they asked them sort of very similar questions. What do you think is the fundamental of your success, the fundamentals of the success of your leadership and that of your company. Almost all of them attributed their success overwhelmingly to their people. Almost all of them, right? And this is primarily, I think, because our social structures, our social fabric is aligned to collective effort and collective achievement, much to the contrary of the West, where it is very nuclear. The social structure is around an individual, and hence the individual contribution becomes very important and is valued very highly. So if you think an architect will be very highly valued in France because it's a very individual job. But when you switch over to India, you will see a manager will be valued in a significant way, because that manager is then supposed to run a team of people and take care of them and arrive at a certain purpose, right? That's reflected in pay also. That's the way pay works in different countries. And pay is the best way you can judge how the society and how the corporate views your contribution. Now, this is an interesting piece. I was once having a conversation with a Dutch colleague of mine, and Dutch people are notorious to be very individualistic. I was talking to this senior Dutch colleague of mine from Amsterdam, and we were talking contextual cultures. What is a contextual culture? Contextual cultures are where every communication depends on a certain context, and you value the context more than the communication that you provide, right? And leadership is so much about communication. You have to talk to your people. You have to let them know how you're feeling, what your missions are, what your vision is, right? So communication is everything. And people in contextual cultures form a very deep relationship. And communication is always layered with that context, right? It is sensitized to the listener's disposition. You don't call a spade because the listener may not appreciate calling a spade. That's the contextual culture, where the context is more important than what is being said, right? There is empathy stitched into the very fabric of our society. It is true not only for the corporate, even in our own personal lives, we always don't say things openly, right? We are taught to be that way. We are taught to be more empathetic in our communication, right? Now, on the other hand, if you look at the Dutch society, it's very different. It is about calling a spade a spade. It's very realistic. Here is what it is. Whether you like it or not, this is what is true. And much of Northwestern Europe is basically that. The Germans, the Dutch, the Belgians, they're all like that, right? Now, there are goods and bads to both of these models, right? We are often taught, we as ourselves, we are often taught that, what teachers teach you, and I'm looking at the flip side of it. We are often taught that what teachers teach you is supposed to be taken as a Bible, right? Now, that's the Guru Brahma principle. I know Amit loves it a lot. Whatever the teachers teach you, that's Bible. What it essentially tells you is that what is being said is less important than who says it, right? So if the teacher says something, irrespective, it's Pythagorean in nature. The value of pi is that, accept it, because the teacher has said so. A lot of Eastern cultures, not only India, grows on that philosophy, right? And there are great values to it. But the Northwestern Europe is different. Now imagine if you put that instruction in the mind of Max Planck or Albert Einstein. If they start believing what their teachers taught them, then society doesn't have all the innovation that we had in physics over the last 100 years, right? That's the flip side of that contextual culture. On the other side, if you look at the extremes of individual contribution, that gets reflected in pay and how things are handled in pay as well, right? I'm a big fan of the band U2, and I've been sort of following them ever since I was like a kid, since 1980s. And I go around, I've sort of tracked them across their last world tour and across all of Europe. I went around for concerts that they did. Now, Bono, the band leader, he is one of the best sort of speakers that you can get. He is regularly in Davos. He's almost every time in the UN meetings, and he's very outspoken. So he keeps mentioning this in many of his lectures, right? He's saying Western societies place too much value on individual contribution, and that's why the leader gets paid much more compared to what the whole team gets, right? And artists and actors, he says, why should I be making much more money per hour compared to, let's say, a plumber or a policeman? Is what I am doing more important to society than what they are doing? Can we live without the policeman or the plumber? That's not the case. However, we place disproportionate values as a society on certain roles and certain individuals, and that causes the problem. I think the problem with the Western end of it is there's too much reliance on individuals. Hence, you create leaders who then become too large. Not to say India doesn't have the problem, but West has it much, much more. So you create the Lee Iacocca's, and you create the Dennis Muhlenbergs, and you create the Jeff Bezos, and then the entire company becomes, or the Zuckerberg, and then the entire company becomes a hostage to that person's ideology and becomes as fallible as that person is. There is no communion, there's no communal decision, right? On the other end of it, if you go very far east, if you go to Japan, things don't move because people don't decide. There is so much consensus-driven leadership that nobody wants to sign a check off. Nobody wants to put their neck on the line. I think where we are in India, we are situated very well. We are empathetic. We take feedback from our people. We, as I said, our society tells us to come together with our people and grow together. So we benefit from those areas. But then on the flip side, as I mentioned, there are those problems of Einsteinian nature when certain teachings can be what I can say, it could be a cap to the way we can realize our own potential, right? That is what I had to add here in terms of leadership type.
Thank you so much, Mr. Roy. And again, quoting from an HBR article, while I was researching a little on the topic that you were going to speak about, it very interestingly quotes that employees in the West emphasize on individual ability and efforts as the basis of their promotions. Whereas in India, a promotion or an advancement is primarily attributed to external features or external facts in terms of marriage, expansion of family, so on and so forth. So that's a very interesting point you did mention. And one thing that I definitely take from your conversation is leadership is about contextualization of your team member depending on the culture that they belong to, and understanding the need, want, goal, experience, expertise, and biases that every team member would have in different geographies. And that is what I would conclude. If we are able as leaders, if we are able to look after relationships in the contextual manner of its culture, the relationship will look back after us. So on that note, that was a brilliant input that you shared. Thank you so much. Janet, over to you.
Thank you, Amit. In one of the chats, I was reading a comment. COVID is not a leadership failure. It is the error of collective humanity. Very strong statement. And I would say that, of course, this is a transitional period in human history. And this is where we should look forward to create a change. The leadership transition today is more important than ever because of the uncertain times. And what I understand is a successful transition is not only the glue that will hold your organization together from year to year, but also fuel that which will continue to propel them in a forward direction. I once again invite Udayan to throw some light on the transition that is taking place from present to develop future skills when it comes to leadership. Over to you then.
The future, everybody wants to know about the future. Now, face it, we don't have a crystal ball to gaze at. However, it's possible to look at the past and make an educated trend study and infer for something which is in a near future. When I say near future, for something like a leadership skill, it would be say 10 years or so, or because everything is evolving now. Now to answer that, what's the future of leadership? Let's understand who are we going to lead at that point of time, let's say 10 years from now. And to do that, also let's for a moment revisit the definition of leadership. Again, how do we define leadership? The common definition is a process of social influence which maximizes the effort of the people that you're leading towards the achievement of a goal. Now, in this definition, the key word is influence. Now, if you cannot influence, you are not a leader, as simple as that. And when great leaders start off, they don't start off to be a leader or to influence. They start out with a purpose to make a difference, okay? And this purpose is what puts them in a leader's pedestal, and people start rallying behind them, right? And so again, 10 years from now, who are these people? Now, again, approaching it very analytically, let's take the help of some infographic, in this case, which was prepared by, give me a second, which was prepared by this company called McCrindle, which is a Australia-based social research firm. So, quick slides just to make things a little clear. Yeah. So, let me minimize my own picture. That's an obstruction here. All right. So, what do we see? Walking the earth right now are probably these 6 generations, starting from people who are born before 1946 till the generation that we call Generation Alpha. Okay, now in between, what do we have? We have the builders, then there's a baby boomer, there's a Gen X, Y, Z, and now we call them Gen Alpha because we have run out of English alphabets. Now, in that, let's look at what's the kind of, so this is the group that we'll be leading from 10 to 20 years from now. Okay, this group, Gen Alpha, is already in schools. So 10 years from now, or probably 20 years from now, they will be thronging the job market. Still, the majority 10 years from now would be this group called the Gen Z. Okay, and we will still have some people who will be doing the last lap of their careers, who are people like me, born during this time, right? 1980 to 1994, Gen X. Now, next part, I would like to draw your attention here. What is the learning style of these people? Because to be led, you should be receptive to some sort of a learning, right? So the learning style is usually, it varies between interactive to virtual, and the influence, or the mode of learning goes from peer groups to these days chatbots. Okay, so what it basically says is, if you look in contradiction, or in contrast to what used to happen before, was experts and practitioners coming in and in formal classroom sessions telling you what should be and what should not be. This group is very much self-motivated, or they would like to go explore, learn it themselves, because there's umpteen materials available around. Okay, what they need, however, is that motivation, and that's where leadership comes in. So let's look at how leadership has now let's call it evolved, or come to being at this point of time. So initially there was a leadership which used to be controlling, directing. We are talking about people who have seen this over the last many decades ago, and it has now transformed to, let's say, when I started my job, it was more of guiding. Then empowerment came up. That was the buzzword. I mean, Shubot took the name of Vineet Nair. He used to always say empowering the employee. So empowerment came up, and now it's no more empowering, because empowerment is taken for granted. It's about inspiring to be. So, and that's the, and what is the kind of an ideal leader? He supports, he collaborates, and he also co-creates. He works together, right? Now, what does this group therefore need? This group needs someone who will nurture them, who will believe in them, who will not control them or drive them, but in fact instill the drive itself in them, okay? So that they are self-driven. And that is exactly the core of servant leadership. So we are going to believe that servant leadership is probably here to be for some time, and that's one of the prominent features of leadership. So on that note, let's proceed. A little bit about servant leadership. Now, coming from an IT background, let me give you an example of servant leadership. A Scrum Master, for all those people who are attending this call who are from IT, you would know what I'm talking about, okay? A Scrum Master, what's his or her work is to achieve the objective of the project, but not by themselves, by empowering the team. Empowering, enabling, clearly setting a goal, removing any impediments, as we call it, on their path. And most importantly, creating that self-organizing team, okay? The ultimate purpose, however, is to, not for the Scrum Master, but generally for a servant leader, is to make oneself redundant. Why? Because you want to bring up self-reliant teams where you are not required, so that you can leave that position and grow up to higher responsibility levels. Now, that also means it opens up opportunities to create great leaders for your team, right? And why it is important is because the generation that you're preparing as leaders will treat their team the way you have treated them, okay? As they say, people lead as they're led, okay? That's a very, very important concept. Now, as a servant leader, therefore, you are expected to treat your team with kindness, nurture them, and imbibe or instill your values in them, so that even when you are not there in the position of power, or even beyond your position or beyond your, say, span of control, the values percolate and they exist, right? Here, let me also quote Gandhi. What he said was, the sign of a good leader is not how many people are following you or how many followers you have, but how many leaders you create. So servant leadership, in essence, is not about competing or running ahead like an alpha leader with your company, but all about empowering, enabling, and finally creating the next breed of leaders for future. Right? Now, for those who found this example or analogy with the IT ways of working a bit difficult to digest, let's go to something else, which I think is the highest form of servant leadership and which most of us can relate to. This is called parenting. Okay, I see parenting is probably the highest form of servant leadership. Why? Because think about the journey, right? The journey of parenting, who all have been through, you would know what I'm talking about, or even if you have seen. It's painful, to be honest. It's absolutely painful. And it's not about just giving the birth. It's years of pain in terms of it's demanding and it's often thankless, okay? However, it's fulfilling. It's more fulfilling than anything that you can possibly imagine, anything else that you can possibly imagine, right? A parent loses his or her sleep, compromises with the lifestyle, puts everything he or she holds dear in terms of, for me, suppose gaming or something else. We put everything behind and bring one thing in priority, which is our child, right? And what happens? In the child's happiness lies our pleasure. In the child's accomplishment lies our sense of achievement. That's nothing but the same feeling that a servant leader goes through, right? But this time for an organization. Now, if you remember, most of you who have grown up kids, the sense of letting your kid just go off on his or her own when they're riding a bicycle, you were holding probably the seat and the balance and ensuring that the kid doesn't fall, and now they're on your own. That's a sense of accomplishment that you feel. But primarily, it looks like the accomplishment of the kid, but you actually tie your emotions and accomplishment to him. When you start doing that to your organization, your project, your assignment, that becomes a form of servant leadership. Now, another thing I want to talk about is think about the kind of sacrifices that go in for a parent, right? It tests your patience, right? It's like a litmus test of, I think somebody else mentioned, I think Janet mentioned about the litmus test of leadership. So litmus test of leadership is typically parenting again. It tests your patience. Think about it. It tests your commitment, your sacrifice, and you pass it all. Why? For one single reason, because you care. Simple. And that's what the future needs, and that's where future leaders will be successful if you care. Okay, so we need the servant leader who cares for his job, for his organization. He cares primarily for the cause, okay, and secondarily for his own benefits in terms of a job promotion, a compensation, etc. The entire objective of a servant leader is all about developing the team with the right culture, the right purpose, the right attitude. Okay, so that finally the team is motivated enough and enabled enough to go and run and attain the goal, right? So finally, the question is this: can you parent your team, and can you parent your organization? If you can, then probably you will be one of the leaders of the future. That's from me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, then, for showing us the future of leadership, and the quote, even I resonate with, of what Jesus Christ said: "As a son of man, I did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give my life as a ransom for humanity." Thank you for highlighting how it's important to serve as a leader and influence others through our life. Thank you so much once again, Udayan. At this moment, I would invite Mr. Pradeep Kamath, to summarize this entire webinar for us and take this opportunity to share words of wisdom. Over to you, Mr. Kamath.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you very much. Well, in this webinar, I'm sure that all the participants would have certainly enjoyed, and it must have been very insightful, as well as possibly very informative type of discussion which has taken place. The seminar really began with a dialogue by, it started with the national president of ISTD, Dr. Nataraj Ray, mentioning about the trying times, mentioning about the turbulent times, the uncertain times, and said that in that context, what is really required is that the leaders must be, the leaders must be ones who will show the right path, the right direction, and must give weightage to capability building, nurturing the followers, make proper decisions, and that will help the organizations to really survive and grow. And therefore, he emphasized on coaching part. Then, Mr. Kurian Daniel, Regional Vice President, Western Region, inaugurated the webinar. And then Janet started with the aspect of women in leadership and started a dialogue on that. And then initiated the proceedings of this. In the very first instance, Udayan Chaudhary mentioned about the aspect of science of leadership. In that, he said, leadership as a science. And he quoted over there, he mentioned Peter Drucker, who said that friction, confusion, and underperformance are the only three things. Really, for an organization, for all other things, which is where what is required is, that is the concept of leadership. Everything else requires leadership. And then he talked of a golden circle, the golden circle, where he talked in context of the various aspects of commitments to of successful leader. And he talked of just three simple terms in terms of why, how, and what. Why tells the purpose, how tells the process, and what tells what the company does. And basically why gives the mission and vision, and then the how, the process, and so on and so forth. Then other thing which he described was, he gave a very excellent type of a biological type of a concept. And he talked in terms of the brain, and he talked of the reptilian brain and the limbic brain. The reptilian brain, which talks in terms of the anger, as well as the other part, which talks of the emotional or rational part. And then he went on to give the examples from various companies. He talked in terms of Tesla, he talked in terms of Facebook, he talked in terms of even the construction of the St. Paul's Cathedral in London. And he said that for anything else, what is really required is an outcome-oriented leadership. And there he gave one wonderful example. The wonderful example was from NASA. He said over there, when John J.F. Kennedy asked various people what they were doing in terms of what was their role, each one explained what the role was in terms of putting, in terms of the mission to the moon. But the janitor, he said that putting the man on the moon, for that I am giving support. And that was the ultimate goal. And he stressed on this particular aspect. I think that was. Then other thing which was described was in terms of that in leading organizations, the human resource is something which differentiates the others from the other resources. So what is required is EQ plus IQ plus spiritual. I think this was something which was also talked of. Mr. L. Vishwanathan, he mentioned that empowerment comes from followers. And there is something which is required in context of the network of collaboration. He talked in terms of leadership traits and also talked in context of the relationships and talked in terms of a larger purpose. And what is the purpose? Why? The passion drive. So it has to be passion. What is then? Passion will drive the success. And he talked in terms of IQ, which basically is from the cognitive theory. And then he talked in terms of the emotional quotient, which possibly is there, where what is more important is in context of the self-awareness. And then he said that yes, one has to do one's own SWOT and use this for action. And then he talked also in context of motivation for self. Don't give up. Let there be perseverance. And he gave the example of Abraham Lincoln, who said at the age of 51, after a spate of maybe not very successful things, yes, the success was God. So perseverance helped him in terms of getting that. And I think he said therefore IQ plus EQ plus SQ are the things which will help. Then Mr. Roy talked in context of the crisis leadership and the inverted leadership. And he gave the number of examples from industry in terms of where some companies have failed. Lehman Brothers, Thomas Cook, Chrysler, WorldCom, or Enron and GM. And for 52% of the Fortune 500 companies of 2000 don't really exist today. And half of FTSE 100 companies will really churn in the next 10 years, was something which was emphasized as such. Then he also discussed about what basically leads to crisis. The external and the market disruption, the regulatory mandates, and the event risk which is there. And he said that challenges are negotiable, are possible, navigable, but resistance is not. And then he gave example. Example was given from the commercial aviation model of the low-cost aviation, which basically changed the whole scenario. The whole picture was changed. And then he gave the example. Also, he talked or discussed regarding the event risk as such. So where he talked of the regulatory mechanisms, the 2008 subprime crisis, and how maybe several investment banks were annihilated in terms of that. And he also discussed about 9/11, significant reduction of revenue for the airline companies was there. He also gave certain other examples in terms of how maybe certain companies did survive. They bounced back. There was a resilience which was seen in terms of company like Goldman Sachs he talked of, while on one side, Enron shut down, there was no energy crisis. The other companies, there were several others like say BP or other companies like the company like say even Aramco came up with a IPO for that matter. He also discussed the case as far as Kodak was concerned in great detail as such. And then managers, he said that leaders can catalyze. They can, there has to be, he talked of, that there has to be proper type of exploration and exploitation to strike a proper balance. He talked in terms of authority-based leadership will basically breed contempt, while trust as a basis for leadership is something which is going to lead to success for that matter. And then he said, he talked in context of that there are excellent examples were also given from a case study relating to the 9/11 medical response team, which was there in terms of how maybe get on a mission, enable the team, build trust, and serve the mission which was there. Then in the second part, we discussed relating to the leadership development from traditional to the, and Mr. Vishwanathan told how maybe the concept has evolved in 19th century, 20th century, and 21st century. How maybe in the 19th century, the emphasis was on building colonies or on land acquisitions. And then the 20th century, it went on to free market economy as well as capitalism. And 21st century is more citizen-centric type of thing. And said how maybe the leadership metrics change from power to profit to purpose. And maybe the impact in terms of the strength, the success, and significance to the society for that matter. So I think that is how it was. Then Mr. Udayan Chaudhary talks of the future leadership in terms of from 10 years from now, what picture would be there in terms of what basically discussing about how maybe across the generations, Gen X, Gen Y, and how maybe that type of a picture was possibly talked of. So here basically the mantra was that nurture them, believe in them, and don't drive them, do not control them. And maybe servant type of leadership would be more emphasized. And servant leadership, he discussed in context of that, yes, one has to take the approach of kindness, one has to take the approach in terms of nurturing approach. And this is much more different than the alpha type of approach that one is talking about. The alpha leadership approach is totally different in that way. And then he talked in context of empowering approach, enabling approach, and creating leaders for the future. And then he gave a wonderful example in context of parenting, which is the highest form of servant leadership, which is there, and said that the litmus test for leadership is basically parenting. You care. The future needs leaders who care. Therefore, develop the right type of culture, develop the right type of attitude, and parent your team, parent your organization. And that is what will lead to the success in context of organization. I think this is what was the whole discussion which has taken place. I think in that context, change continues to be a major constant in terms of the competitive business and the global environment which is there. The challenges of keeping up with or leading has never been more big, and competition is coming from new as well as possibly unanticipated type of sources which are there. So leadership as well as learning will play a very critical role in enabling the organizational growth and transformation. Today's and tomorrow's leaders must be flexible, collaborative, and able to leverage subject matter expertise as well as willing to continue learning. So learning organizations must be able to serve, maybe support leaders as they develop all these characteristics. I think with this, let me tell you that this was possibly the more or less discussion which took place in terms of this webinar which ISTD and IRYS has organized. I think I'm sure that you all found it extremely informative and insightful. At least I found it that way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kamath. So I must say, a big kudo to you in terms of the detailed and meticulous paraphrasing of the entire webinar for the benefit of all the participants as well as the panelists on the call. And while we come to the closure of this global webinar, a thought I would want to rake in everybody's mind is, what does it take to be a real leader who can bring this paradigm shift? Is it the one who's confident in terms of who they are and what they stand for, or who truly inspires people to achieve extraordinary results? A thought I would want to leave everybody with is a book that I recently read. And the book's name is Why Should Anyone Be Led by You? The author is Robert Goffey and Gareth Jones, who argue that leaders don't become great by aspiring to a list of universal characteristic traits. Rather, effective leaders are more authentic. They deploy individual strengths to engage their followers' hearts, mind, and most importantly, their soul with the right context. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of IRYS, the IRYS team, Janet and myself, and on behalf of all the three panelists, I would like to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for involving and participating with us via chat and your valued inputs. Till we meet again, I'd like to leave you with the upcoming sessions that we have for you, and I'd leave that on the screen for a while so that we don't say with this we end the conversation. I always say now the relationship keeps building. Right. So, Janet, if I may request you to get the slide on for us.
Yeah. Thank you. On behalf of ISTD, also we are thank all the panelists and others. And Janet and Irish, thank you very much on behalf of ISTD for this type of wonderful session. To all the panelists and Kamatji, a very wonderful session. We have enjoyed the whole session. Kamatji, thank you very much for you summarize the thing. And it's a very good thing for the Irish and ISTD done a wonderful session. In future, we'll work together for further some session. Thank you very much for on behalf of ISTD. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nataraj.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Amit, there's a request. Can you repeat the name of the book?
Okay. Why should anyone be led by you? The author is.
The chat.
Oh yeah, I'll do that. Right, and it's a beautiful book. I've just finished it like last month. The author is Robert Goffey and Gareth Jones. I'll put that on the chat and I'll WhatsApp it to the team.
Thank you.
Okay, so on this note, the reason we have the slide up is for the purpose of the team to understand that knowledge, right, is best when it is shared and best when it is discussed with different perspectives. And for those of us who think that knowledge is immaterial, I would want to end the conversation by saying, try ignorance for a change. And that will be very fatal and dangerous. So if you don't believe in ignorance, but you believe in knowledge, we have certain courses that we bring to the table eventually for our attendees as well as our members of the ISTD teams. right? So till we meet again, thank you so much, and
Thank you.
stay
Thank you.
hungry, stay foolish.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Kurianji,
Thank you.
very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you very much.
And we will work together